Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Daily Compliance News for December 30, 2020. In the zero paid edition. We begin with that story as Omni Hotels received some $76 million in PPP loans, yet they paid none of that money to any of the service workers. So when you look for fraud in PPP loans, you see that it's in a wide variety of places. Indeed, the one PPP loan for one hotel was $2.6 million to retain 246 jobs, and none of that went to the workers. They were all furloughed or laid off. So we see many examples of fraud in the PPP program, and unfortunately, this is a ubiquitous one. Next up, from the BBC, the UK government has set up a hotline for furlough fraud and has received more than 20,000 tips. The scheme has paid the wages of more than 9 million workers. Now a committee of MPs is calling for the names of all firms getting PPP money and keeping it, as opposed to being like the prior story about Omni paying it to the workers. So it is a hugely big issue if companies are not fulfilling their PPP obligations literally across the world. Next up, from the Foundation for Economic Education, the first time on the Daily Compliance News, a new expose shows that UK's COVID response was rife with corruption and cronyism. Roughly $5 billion in taxpayer money allocated to PPE, or personal protection equipment, went to companies connected with the government. The fraud, waste, and abuse has just been really overwhelming, and now the UK government is in on the game as well. So hopefully they will respond as well. And finally, our final story revolves around the Nashville bombing. And what I want to talk about there is an article in the Wall Street Journal that the bombing exposes weak points for business communications. And the attack underscores the need for companies to diversify and secure their networks. Many of you in compliance do not think of your communications network as a risk, but the Christmas Day bombing in Nashville hit a weak point in telecommunications infrastructure, disrupting both home and internet service for days and underscoring a key risk around digitized businesses. The bomb knocked out a central node that directs data from users and businesses across telecom systems. The incident, information technology experts say, highlights how a terrorist attack or a natural disaster or even a cyber incident could really wipe out and lay low the U.S. communication systems. So you need to look at this as you would any other risk. And if you haven't looked at this as a risk, that would be a great time to do a risk assessment on what would be your company's capabilities. Living in Houston, I certainly am aware that if there's a hurricane, it can wipe out your communications infrastructure. So what can you do to communicate out if the worst hits? The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.